When we think about aviation history, we usually picture famous airplanes or those epic globe-spanning journeys. But today, we're going to talk about a story that's mostly forgotten, a really wild moment when the dream of a new age literally fell out of the sky and crashed right into the heart of a major American city. It was supposed to be this amazing spectacle of modern technology just soaring high above the crowds. But in just a few seconds, that beautiful vision turned into an absolute nightmare, a really tough lesson written in fire and wreckage. The place, Chicago. The date, July 21st, 1919. You've got this bustling, optimistic post-war city, and nobody had any idea that they were about to witness what would become America's worst airship disaster. Okay, so to really get the scale of this tragedy, you first have to understand the hope that this thing represented. This wasn't just some random aircraft. This was a symbol of the future, cruising over the city. So what are we talking about here? Well, the Wingfoot Air Express was a dirigible, a blimp. It was owned by the Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company, and its whole purpose that day was pretty simple. It was for promotion and, well, fun. It was giving people a bird's-eye view of their city. The mission seemed totally straightforward. It was just a demonstration flight, a scenic little trip from Grant Park over to the popular White City amusement park. Now, what's really important to remember here is that this was its third flight of the day. This whole spectacle was already starting to feel pretty routine. So on that fateful afternoon, the airship lifted off for what everybody thought was just another routine flight. This time, though, the journey would be anything but. The breaking point came at exactly 4:55 p.m. As this blimp is just floating over the city, its massive envelope, the big bag filled with super flammable hydrogen gas, just suddenly bursts into flames. In a split second, that symbol of the future became a terrifying fireball. So now let's break down how this disaster unfolded, right over one of the busiest parts of Chicago. Try to picture this. The Wingfoot was cruising at about 1,200 feet. That's kind of like being at the top of a 100-story skyscraper. And it's right over the Chicago Loop. There was absolutely nowhere for it to go, but straight down. People on the ground were just staring up in horror. Eyewitnesses described this awful scene as the fire just ripped through it in seconds. They saw, and I'm quoting here, the bag buckle and quiver. The whole structure was just gone. The airship was doomed. For the 5 people on board, it was just pure terror and a series of desperate choices. The pilot and one mechanic, they actually managed to parachute to safety. But for the others, it was just tragic. One mechanic's parachute caught on fire. A passenger landed really hard and died later from his injuries. And another passenger got tangled up in the rigging and was killed in the final crash. And this is where the disaster takes this unbelievable second turn. The burning wreckage didn't just fall into an empty street or a park. No, it plunged directly through a massive glass skylight of the Illinois Trust and Savings Bank. It turned a normal workday into a scene of unimaginable horror. So what you have here is a tragedy on 2 fronts. One is unfolding 1,000 feet up in the air, and the other is happening in an instant on the ground, among people who had absolutely no idea what was coming for them. Just try to put yourself in that scene. Inside the bank's huge, grand main room, there are about 150 employees, and they're just wrapping up their day. All of a sudden, their entire world is shattered by a rain of flaming debris, molten metal, and burning fuel. That beautiful skylight offered zero protection. In fact, it was the entry point for the whole disaster. This slide here just breaks down the terrible toll. You had 3 people from the airship who died, but on the ground, 10 bank employees were killed. In total, 13 lives were lost, and at least 29 other people were injured. It's just a staggering cost for a simple promotional flight. And just to put this into perspective, this wasn't just some local tragedy. At that time, it was the single deadliest airship accident in the history of the United States. It was a national wake-up call, for sure. But, from these ashes came some really crucial lessons. The disaster, as absolutely horrific as it was, it forced a reckoning, and it ultimately led to changes that would make flying safer for everyone. Which, of course, brings us to the big question that everyone was asking. How on earth could this have happened? What specifically went so wrong? Well, the thing is, the investigation never found one single definitive spark. But the real culprit, it was the whole design. I mean, you've got this giant bag of highly flammable hydrogen gas floating right over gasoline engines that were known to backfire and throw sparks. It wasn't a question of if a disaster would happen, it was really a question of when. So you better believe the reaction in Chicago was swift and decisive. Before this crash, there were hardly any rules about flying over the city, but afterwards, bam, new regulations were passed to restrict airships over populated areas. And that Grant Park airstrip where the Wingfoot took off, they shut it down, a direct line from tragedy to regulation. But the impact went way beyond Chicago. This crash became a critical, even if it's often overlooked, turning point. It proved the incredible danger of flying hydrogen airships over cities, and it directly fueled the American push to control the world's supply of non-flammable helium. That shift is what made future airship programs, like the ones for the US Navy, even possible and dramatically safer. So the Wingfoot Express, in its tragic failure, it really underscored a lesson that would echo for decades. Progress without real safety isn't progress at all. And that kind of leaves us with a question that's just as relevant today as it was back in 1919, right? The Wingfoot Express, it represented the exciting promise of new technology, and its crash represents the devastating cost of getting it wrong. So how do we keep innovating and pushing boundaries while making sure we always protect the public? It's really the essential balancing act at the heart of all progress.